Hey guys, it's Corrosum here, and today we're going to learn how to implement CRUD with Node.js and MySQL. So let's get started. In the last video we learned how to insert data to a database, and today we're going to use that knowledge to implement all the CRUD functions, which is create, read, update and delete. Here we are using Sequelize as the ORM, and it has some cool functions so that we don't have to manually write SQL commands. So that makes our lives so much easier. Alright, so let's open up the project and let's start building our API. Alright, in the last video we wrote our save method to insert a blog post to the database, and today we're gonna write the other functions. So let's get started with show method, which is for getting a single product. I'm gonna write function. I'm gonna name this function show, and I need to pass request and response parameters as well. Alright, to get a single object we need the ID of the object, so we have to pass that ID in the URL. To get that ID, I'm gonna define new constant, and I'm gonna get the ID from the request params dot id. So this is the way I can get URL parameters from the request. Alright, and then I'm gonna access the model post models dot post, and for getting a single object with its primary key we have a method called find by pk, which is find by primary key, and we need to pass this ID to this method as the argument, and this method also returns a promise. So we have to use this then keyword and catch keyword to handle errors. Alright, if this return a successful response, we can get that with this arrow function, and if it returns an error we have to catch that with this arrow function. Alright, so if it returns a successful response, which is the object we want, we can return that with the JSON like this response. Status is it is a successful response, so we can use 200, and for the payload we can just use this response because we are returning just the product we want like this. And if it returns an error, let's return the error response as well. Status should be, let's say, 500 for internal server error, and the body should be, let's define a custom message called let's say something went wrong. Alright, so method is complete, and now we need to export that method. I'm gonna include that method in this export object. Alright, and now I'm gonna open up the post route file and add a new route. Here the method should be show, which we have just exported, and for the URL segment we have to define the ID. So this is a variable in the URL, so we should define it like this using this colon mark and ID, so that we can get that parameter here like this. Alright, Now this looks complete. We can now test this on the our API testing client, which is Insomnia. For that, I'm gonna create a new request, and it should be a GET request. The name should be get post and the URL should be localhost port 3000 post, then the post ID. Let's say the ID of the product I want to get is 8, and we should define the URL like this. We don't have a JSON body because this is a GET request. Alright, so now we need to run our node application. I'm gonna open up the terminal and type npm start. Looks like we don't have any errors, and I'm gonna hit the send button. It says it returns a not found. Let me check in the code. Oops, this method is still post. We need to change this to get. My mistake. I'm gonna stop the server and start it again. Now let's try again. Yes, we get the post with the ID of 8. Let's try with another ID 9. Yes, we get the blog post with the ID of 9. It's the same content because we have not updated the content when we are saving the post, but still it's a different post. As we can see, these all have same title and content. Alright, so that method is complete. Next, let's write another function to get all the posts. Here I'm gonna write a new function. I'm gonna name that function index, and here we need to get all the posts that have been created in the post table. Alright, I'm gonna add these request and response parameters, and I'm gonna access the models, then the post model. Here Sequelize has this method called find all, which allows us to get all the records in a table. This method also returns a promise, so we have to use this then keyword and the catch keyword. Just like we did previously, if that returns a successful response, we can use this arrow function to return the response, and if that returns an error, we can use this arrow function to return an error response. Alright, if it is a success, then we can just return the response. Status should be 200 because it's a success response. In the JSON body, I'm gonna just return the result returned from the find all method. And for the error, I'm gonna do the same just like we did in the previous method. Status should be like 500, and for the JSON body, I'm gonna copy this we did in the previous method. Alright, so this method is also complete, and I'm gonna export this method as well. Hit save, and in the post route I'm gonna define another route. This should be a get route, and the URL segment for index method should be just posts, so we don't have to add anything next to this slash. Alright, so let's test this on the Insomnia. For that, I'm gonna create a new request. I'm gonna name this get posts, and it is a get request. The URL should be localhost and port 3000 / posts, like this. And I'm gonna start the node.js application. npm start. Looks like we don't have any errors. Let's hit that endpoint and let's see what happens. It works. So here we get all the records in the post table. Alright, so next we're gonna write another function for updating a post. Function, I'm gonna name this function update. For updating a post, we're gonna need few additional parameters, which is post ID for identifying the post that needs to be updated, and the user ID, because only the user that created the particular post should be allowed to update that particular post. Alright, to get the post ID, we're gonna use the same approach we did using request parameters. I'm gonna copy this line right here and paste it here, and I'm gonna create another constant here. I'm gonna name this constant updated post, which is an object with the updated values. I'm gonna scroll little up and copy this object I created in the save method, and I'm gonna paste it right here. The title can be updated, and the content, image URL, and the category as well, but the user ID cannot be updated because user who created the post remains the same in the updated post as well. Here I'm defining another constant, user ID, and I'm just hard coding it to 1 because we don't have users yet. Alright, now I can access modules and our post module. Here in Sequelize, we have a method called update for updating a particular record, and in this update method, as the first argument, I'm gonna pass this updated post object, and as the second parameter, I need to pass another object for the condition for identifying that particular record we need to update. Here in the second object, I'm gonna use this where keyword and pass another object with the values and the column names. I need to filter my post. I need to filter my post with ID column and ID I am passing with the URL parameters. Don't get confused with these values because this is the column name and this is the column value we are passing, and we can pass multiple conditions as well. I'm gonna pass user ID as well. So here we are filtering the post records where the ID column is this value and the user ID column is this value. Alright, this update method also returns a promise. Then we have to use then and catch. If it is a successful response, we will get a success result, and if it is, I'm gonna return a successful response to the user. The status code should be 200 and the JSON body, I'm gonna put a custom message here, post updated, and with the updated post. Alright, and if it is a error response, I can copy the same response and message. Should be something went wrong, and for the error I'm just returning the error returned by this update method. Alright, so here what we are doing is we are getting the post ID from the URL and this updated post body from the request body, and we are hard coding this user ID value because we don't have users yet, and then we are using this Sequelize method called update. As the first parameter, I'm passing this updated post object, and as the second parameter I'm passing the conditions. Here we can pass multiple conditions, multiple column names and values. The first one is the column name and the second one is the column value we are passing. Alright, just like we did before, this update method returns a successful result, and we are returning a successful message to the user, and if not, we are returning an error response to the user. Alright, so this looks complete. Let's add this to the export object, and let's create a new route. We have to use patch method, and the method name is update. Alright, let's test this on the API testing client. I'm gonna create a new request. I'm gonna name this update post. It is a patch request. There is a body. URL should be localhost. Posts, and with the ID of, let's say, 8, and this should have a JSON body. I'm gonna copy the JSON body in the save post request. I'm gonna paste it down here. I'm gonna update the values a little bit. Alright, so let's start the Node application. I'm gonna open up the terminal and run npm start. Looks like we don't have any errors, and let's hit this endpoint. We get a successful response, post updated successful, but we don't get the updated post. In this update method here, this returns a boolean whether it is successful or not. So we have to use this object as the updated post. I'm gonna restart the node application, npm start, and let's try again. Here we get a successful response and the updated object as well, and we can see that in our table, title and the content and other columns have been updated with the new values. Alright, now we have implemented the updated method, and we have one method left to create, which is delete. Let's create that right now. I'm gonna write new function. Let's name this destroy, and here request and response. We need to get the post ID for identifying the post we need to delete. I'm gonna copy this line right here. Oops. And then I need to define the user ID as well, because the users should not be allowed to delete someone else's post. Alright, just like we did before, I'm gonna access the models and post model. Here in Sequelize there is a method called destroy, and as the parameters we have to pass a where condition, which is the ID and the user ID, just like we did before. And it also returned a promise. I'm gonna copy this response for that as well. Alright, here what we are doing is we get the ID from the URL and the user ID, which is supposed to be decoded from the token. We don't have that yet, so we are just hard coding it. And then using this Sequelize destroy method, we are passing these conditions using this where keyword, column name and column values. If it is a successful result, we return a successful response to the user, and if not, we return an error response. Alright, this should work. I'm gonna export this method as well. Destroy, and we should define a route as well. I'm gonna copy this one, and the method should be delete, and the ID is just like that. The method name is destroy. Alright, this should work. Let's test this on the API testing client. I'm gonna create a new request, delete post the method is delete localhost port 3000 and the ID. I'm gonna use ID 8 and make sure we start the node.js application npm start. Alright, now let's hit this endpoint and let's see what happens. It says not found. Oops, I need to add this post prefix here. Let's try again. There is an error. Let me check what I have done. I made a huge mistake. I feel so terrible. I forgot to remove this line because we don't have an updated post. I'm really sorry about that. And that must be the error. Alright, I'm gonna restart the server. I'm gonna stop the server and start it again. Let's try again. Now it works. Post deleted successfully. Alright, so we have implemented all the CRUD methods in the PostController. Before winding up this session, let me do a little tweaking to some of our methods. Let's open up this getPost request, which returns a single post. When we hit that endpoint, we get a single post. Let's try with an ID which is not in the post table. When we hit this, it returns just null. It's pretty ugly. Let's handle that in our show method. Let me open up the method, the controller, and in this show method here, if this find by pk function cannot find the record with this ID, it returns a false. We can check this value, and if it is a false, we can return a custom user-friendly message to the user. Alright, if this is a false, or if it is a true, let's return this one, and else let's return a custom message like this. If it is a false, which means the system cannot find that record, so it should be a 4 not 4. Let's say post not found. Alright, so this is more cleaner and more user friendly. Let me stop the server and start it again. Let's try that. Now it says the post not found. So this is the best practice for an API, so it can handle every situation. You can do the same for other methods like update and also destroy. If this result is a false, which means that that object, that record does not exist in the table. Alright, so in this video we learned how to implement CRUD functions, which is create, read, update and delete in our API. And we learned some error handling as well. In the next video we're going to learn how to validate your data before sending to database. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video.